Okay, we're good. What's in it?
My fans.
Does it turn out somewhere?
No, it's solar. There might be something we can do with it. But let's proceed, and then we'll see what we come up with, and then we can always fix or reshoot or something. Okay, so my first question to you is going to be, who are you? Would you please introduce yourself and your name, your given name, your tribal name?
My name is Lana.
Okay, let's start again.
Okay.
I was just actually just throwing that out.
Okay. But how do you want me to respond to it being like, my name is this and that, and this is my tribal name, and this is how
I'm gonna ask that.
how tribal names are given?
Well, no, and then you. Okay, so I'm gonna ask actually exactly what I just said I was gonna ask you.
Okay.
So who are you? Would you please give your given name, your tribal name if you have one, where you're from, and then you could say, and then you could go into your name.
Okay.
Where I come from.
Where I come from. Okay. Do you want me to mention that I'm an artist then?
And then I'll ask you, well, so.
What do I do?
Yeah, what do you do? Because I was going to ask you things like, well, so you've been in the United States for how long? And you came here to.
To what? Okay.
Yeah, and, things will come up as I go. So let's begin with who you are. Who are you? And if you would give your given name, your tribal name, and where you are from, both in, as we know it, and tribally.
My name is Svetlana Romanova. I'm from Yakutsk, Russia. It's in Siberia. It's within Republic Sakha-Yakutia, which is a self-governed indigenous republic in the Arctic. My given name is Svetlana Romanova. I do have an unofficial tribal name. It's Serdikchana, means the bright one. And the way...
Okay. You're fast.
Too fast.
And louder.
Okay.
Let me start from the top. So if you would please tell us who you are, your name, your given name and your tribal name, please, and where are you from in the same way.
My name is Svetlana Romanova. I'm from Yakutsk, Russia. It's a city in indigenous republic, self-governed republic in Russia up in the Arctics. My tribal name is Serdikchana, which means the bright one, but it's an unofficial tribal name since tribal names were prohibited up until 90s.
So about your name, where does that come from? Your tribal name?
My tribal name came to me from my mother, and she gave me the name Serdikchana, which also is a translation of my Russian name, but the kids were given Russian names in order to protect them from the evil spirits. I guess that was the sort of logistics of it.
So we'll come back to tribal stuff, but so you've been in the United States for how long, and you came here to?
I've been in the United States for 7 years now, and I came here to do my arts degree, postmasters, and bachelor.
And you got a degree from?
I got my undergrad degree from Otis College of Art and Design, and got my MFA from California Institute of the Arts.
Well, I want to share with you, this is also a question, you can look at me, that I profess to know nothing about Siberian people, other than that is touted as our source of our tribal peoples, and following the so-called migration route. And of course what little that most Americans know of Siberia, which is a godforsaken, frozen, remote place, but just what you've shared with me has been so amazing to find out about your people and the reality of where you live. So you want to talk a little bit about your homeland?
Sure. Well, it's a pretty big territory. We occupy 1/3 of the Russia, and obviously we own most of the, resources and gold and diamonds. So it's been sort of in use by Russian government, and the areas, I guess rural areas, live in extreme poverty. There's no development such as like roads or clinics or anything like that. Getting food is really difficult. So it's, in a way, it's very similar to America, but it operates in a similar ways, but it looks very different.
Okay, operates in a similar way with what tribal
I
neglect,
guess,
or
I guess like politics, the way the politics in between indigenous people, native people and non-native people operate, it's the same way. I guess it's a very similar oppression, but the way oppression operated in Russia, it was very invisible for the longest time, so people had no idea that they were oppressed, and there was a taboo to sort of talk about your own sort of misfortune in a way.
given the fact of scientific and reasoning that indigenous life, at least for the Pacific Rim, started, in your area, which I don't believe. It goes against tribal creation stories, at least ours. But I think there's some validity to it, only in the sense that I have a strong belief in the people of the Pacific Rim, which I include you as well. You want to talk a little bit about the similarities that you found between the native people you met here and your native peoples?
Sure. The similarities, I would say, there's some physical similarities in a way, and similarities in sort of like a philosophies about the worldview, or like sort of like similarities in practices of like your own culture, or the way you perceive it, and then the way you're being projected by non-natives and seen in a way where they put you in a box of how native you should be.
Yeah.
So those would be the similarities. But to be honest, I don't necessarily believe in the creation myths the way they construct it, because I believe that sort of, in a way, it says no to our oppression, and just like also validates Western culture by bringing Columbus as a role play, I guess, as like a major person who decides where our fate goes, because he becomes the beginning of creation in that case.
Well, definitely, when I met you, I did a double take. Thought you were more Asian from what I know of Asian, because I hadn't met any Siberians, and but it was really interesting to hear about your travels to, say, like places that are heavily populated with native people like Navajo, which I know you've been. You want to talk a little bit about their reaction about?
Yeah, well, I encountered Navajo's DNA people. I guess I was road tripping a lot. I was getting to know America, and my understanding of the land, I guess, came through me driving through a lot of rural areas. And I met Navajo people, and I kind of felt some sort of a kinship in a way. And so I started practicing going there a lot whenever I felt homeless. But then I started thinking about it. Why is that so? And I think the kinship comes from like sort of like a understanding of oppression, and also like particular situations that people are placed in, and also the way the way landscape sort of operates in their culture and has a lot to do with the way of life and the way even cities are located. So that's how I got it.
Yeah, I guess it was an opinion at one time, like feeling sorry for them because they were so remote, and yet here in California we're not so remote anymore, particularly here in North County, where there's an encroachment. There's people like me that wish we were much more remote from the outside world, because there's certainly benefits, and maybe some there are definitely disadvantages, but I think with technology as it is, nobody's remote.
Yeah.
With that in mind, are your people getting in tune with telecommunications and?
Yeah, technology is pretty big. There are a lot of movies are being produced within the Republic, and they're sort of creating this new indigenous voice within the movies, right? So
like Wild West.
Like Wild West, or like more sort of like indie narratives, young people coming of age stories, stuff like that.
Okay.
Television is big. We have a pretty big television channel. And kids are doing a lot of stuff, but my only problem with that is that they're taking sort of Western ideas and models of how like particular things operate, even the movies, and using them as a template instead of developing sort of your own indigenous voice within the form.
Yeah. That'll come next, I guess.
I think so, yeah. I mean, this is like sort of the first step, and we're getting like sort of assimilated to this idea of technology being present and us being, in a way, sort of ability to expose ourselves through it, using it as a tool. So.
Well, this just came into my mind. That's your gift.
I guess.
To be the go-between. I kind of feel like, for me, art making is not. It's something you're born with, but it's beyond that. It's a gift, and there's some reasoning behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to figure out after 65 years what that is, but I do feel that we were born with something different.
Mm-hmm.
You've also traveled to Northern California, where there is a cultural connection, eh?
Yes, I traveled to Fort Ross. Fort Ross is it's like a mission colony, I guess, in a way. Russian, yes. So Russian people came all the way from Russia. They traveled through Siberia, picked up some Aleutian people and Native Alaskans, came to Fort Ross, built a colony, held all the females hostages. So every single Native person, since they have the skills to, how to, accustomed to new territories, how to hunt. So they were the gatherers. And what happened was that the couple of tribal people met Pomo people, Kashai people. And I think some of them maybe integrated their, they did some cultural exchanges, and Kashai people also were present in the Ross as well.
And it's still there.
And it's still there, but now it sort of operates as this place where tourists come, and I saw a lot of Russian tourists coming and celebrating sort of their culture, we've been here, but it's kind of in a way offensive because they don't acknowledge that people brought other people beyond their will.
A foothold, so to speak, or at least a connection, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the Pomo people, culturally, did you see why there was maybe an attraction there? Were there certain foods or tool making
or something? Not necessarily. I would say there were some language similarities, but those were assimilated languages, sort of tribes talking to each other and then borrowing words from each other. So there's some words that are left over there. But I've noticed that most of them are actually Russian words rather than indigenous words. Mm-hmm. But maybe there are some. I just didn't do a very in-depth research.
Yeah. And your language is categorized as what?
Oh, well, the thing is, I'm actually a mixed baby. So my dad is from the lower tribe, which is Saha people, and I think the language group is a Turki group. And my mom is Even people, and her language group is completely different group.
So what are those language groups? I mean, not aside from Turkish, but tribal.
The thing is, nobody knows. There are no particular studies in that. There are some studies that suggest that languages belong to this group or that group, but there's nothing more than just that connection. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in most of the times when people do research, they don't take into consideration the fact that there was a trade route going in between, and it was probably a big port, and people were coming to trade fur and other goods. So the way the story goes right now, it's pretty much based on what they have encountered at that specific time when people were already trading.
I love the fact that it's unknown.
Yeah.
Well, even though it's supposedly known here, there's always kind of people scratching their head why this tribe up the road is speaking completely different than this other one.
Uh-huh.
It's just the way the cars landed.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, I feel like when you do assign research on languages and anthropological history, it's good for them to take into consideration that people were existent for a while and the cultures were thriving. So there was already an invisible exchange and assimilation happening, and just people don't want to acknowledge that, I feel like, majority.
Let's get down. So, coming from a native perspective, and obviously from what I'm learning, you were victimized and being victimized now, mm-hmm. and maybe the similarities between our tribes, and you want to point some of those inconsistencies out. I mean, things that you'd like to not see or change.
Right. I would like to see sort of a more resourceful land use in a way, and it would be great if Russian government gave us some percentage of that money that they're taking, that they're making through the land development, I guess, in a way. Mm-hmm. I would like to see less nepotism within the tribal politics.
Thank you.
Yes. And I don't know, I would like to see sort of a more radical, sort of a thoughts on how could our self-governing operate in this situation. and not be so dependent on Western models, not be so dependent on the Russia. But that's also kind of an impossible topic if you think about it in relation where we are located and how we're getting all of our, exported goods, meaning like fruits and vegetables, so like it's difficult to imagine us without the Russia, but it would be ideal, obviously. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I was thinking, well, it's just human instinct and survival, and you do what you need to survive. But there are some things that that are inner tribal, that become such a part of our existence. Like you mentioned, nepotism. It's sort of like, let's say, the same crowd getting in there and leading because they can.
They can,
Mix that with money.
Money.
Gets worse. And then just, I guess, continuing that, to live, or that life that being a victim produces.
Yeah.
So like.
But it also becomes like a mode of operation, the way a lot of people use it. They misuse the fact that they've been oppressed, right?
Right.
So they victimize themselves, and then they try to gain some sort of power from it, which is not the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's like almost like committing a crime, right? But then also the way I see nepotism is us sort of getting adjusted and being introduced to this sort of new world politics, right?
Yeah.
Where the commerce and like the produce and everything else, the capitalism in a way rules the world. So there's a different tribal relation, and that tribal relation is only about the money and the power, not about your sort of family relations, let's say, like old days or something like that.
So you have substance abuse problems?
We have substance abuse problems. We have problems of diabetes, high rate of suicide. Diabetes, high rate of suicide, depression.
Yeah.
Psychological. Like I would say there are definitely unaddressed problems where people go through specific trauma and it's not talked about, and then the coping mechanism becomes, alcohol or any kind of substance abuse. So
we are related.
We are related.
Yeah, and change comes hard. We've not moved on from alcohol. This depends on where you're at. Now it's drugs, and say people that can afford it can afford better drugs. But there was a time here on this reservation when the trash drugs of crack was really prominent, and I hear that's kind of happening in the plains because they're isolated and they can, or labs have moved in, and it's
labs like meth labs are big, and I've heard a lot of them coming. Let's say in North Dakota, for example, right? They're building like this huge oil, mining and all this crazy stuff happening, and a lot of people who are outside of the tribe move in, see the revenue for capital, and develop that thing, and then it becomes like a thing, So it's not good.
Let's go back. Let me dig further about the economic situation, because I think that's important, because it certainly is a pathway to either destruction or a positive future. So you hold no treaty rights as indigenous people? Or?
No, we hold no treaty rights. Well, recently, actually, last year, in our passports, officially now we can state which tribe we belong to.
Yeah.
They took it out during the 90s, I think. They took it out, but then now they're reintroducing it. And the Russian government sort of presenting it in a way that, let's develop the North, right? But obviously the ideas of developing the North is, let's go occupy the land and dig for more stuff.
Suck it dry.
Right, and they're also giving out a tribal land to the people who are incoming to work at those places.
No.
So it's like our land is fully for giveaway, especially, the herding nomadic tribes, like my mom's side of the family, they have no resources. There's nothing developed for them. And they're also not that well acknowledged, you know what I'm saying? There's the nepotism part also comes in where it's the Republic Saha Yakutia is named after my dad's tribe, which is the biggest tribe, but it does not include all the little tribes that live within the Republic in the Constitution or anything like that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's sort of not thought of, and it's not talked about, so that also creates sort of inner racism within the tribes, meaning I'm from this tribe and I'm from this tribe and I'm cooler than you, which is the way I see it, it's sort of a spiked systematic genocide in a way.
Yeah. I think, well, no, there is that here. language speakers, non-language speakers, urban Indians, res Indians,
Half-bloods.
half-bloods, darkness. So about this economic situation, since you're not recognized, so then is there a welfare state, kind of?
Okay, the way it operated before, right? So it was somewhat stable in the 90s with our first president, and we were somewhat using our own resources, and like things were being developed. Let's say like cultural centers were opened, universities were developed. But Russia declared that although we're a republic, they're coming up with this new term where we're becoming like far eastern part of the federation. So meaning like we are a little thing within the federation now. So that also gives the Russia to dictate who's going to be our next president. Meaning like all of our presidents after our first president being chosen by Russia and promoted by Russia, and they were chosen because they mostly been like, CEOs of like diamond mining companies or something.
And they're non-native?
They're native, but I mean like, it's like in the way that I see them, they're not native anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's the good news?
What's the good news? Well, the good news is probably that a lot of younger people are coming up with new forms of resistance. There's a huge sort of like a anarcho-punk movement happening within the young people where they actually start thinking and reflecting about the state of Russia, or even like in most of the cases they actually talk about the way Western country, meaning specifically America, sees Russia, and then the way the Russians see Russia. So they create problem within a problem. So I think that it's sort of like a new young seed for something bigger.
Well, let's talk about this punk, because that's no, that's really really interesting, and also to me it's sort of like another form of tribalism.
I see.
And art really that there's a form of art there that really is powerful, because it can reach a number of people that it hadn't reached before, and actually gives voice.
Well, the funny thing, I think they're developing sort of like this exchange and getting some exposure in San Francisco.
Really?
Which is really exciting for me.
Yeah. Well, these weren't Siberian, but there was the Red Elvises. Have you not?
No.
Okay, it's a Russian band.
Oh my god! Okay.
And they're not from Siberia, but they definitely are Russian. And I thought, okay, but all the publicity said, direct from Russia, like a real Russian band, and I guess whatever a Russian is, they seem to be, the way they talk and stuff, but they played a really interesting form of rockabilly, almost sounding like surf music. Oh. And I thought, this is great, because it's sort of like ambassadors, and they sang a couple songs in Russian, whatever dialect that was, and I thought, this is really great. So it's kind of an ambassador, because we don't necessarily think of Russia as rock and rollers, but I've been to Tokyo, and there are definitely rock and rollers there,
definitely, yes.
and everything else. But wow. So
Russia does have like they have a big scene for pop music, let's say.
Right.
It's huge.
Right.
There's a huge scene for hip hop scene now, where a bunch of Russian people appropriate black culture, which is problematic for me personally.
Yes.
But it's like, what the hell are you guys doing on this planet? But then there's another sort of like a kind of layer where there has always been sort of like this underground rock and roll, like rock and punk movements, and they were big. I think back in the 80s or even 70s, I'm not sure, there was a band named Kino, which means movie, film, and the leader of the band was I'm not necessarily sure he was half Korean or Mongolian or something like that. I mean, he was not Russian looking man.
Yeah.
And I remember they were a big thing.
Yeah.
Like they were a big thing when I was growing up, and they were pretty contemporary, and they were talking about how there was no like sort of like a talk about sex or sexual freedom during USSR times, or like the idea that drugs existed was completely disclosed, and he was actually singing how like there's so much pot in Russia right now, kind of thing, So counterculture always existed, but it always got in like very limited exposure.
So you touched a nerve there. You've probably noticed that Indians here, American Indians, artists, are also still categorized in a box.
Yes.
And there aren't a whole lot of us that are recognized as mainstream. personally, I just sort of forgot about it, though I guess you could say I'm successful in that. And the reason I'm saying that is only because I do show in mainstream galleries, but I'm still unknown in a lot of circles. So, is there an art scene, a contemporary art scene happening in Siberia? I mean, you have to have a market, but is there something there?
Okay, so the way it operates is very much similar to, let's say, native arts in here, right?
Yeah, okay.
So there are very like a tribal-looking art happening, and people, you know, I've heard it became like a hot shit in the last 5 days. Like there are lots of European tourists who are coming to do like extreme tours, you know.
Yeah.
Go to the tundra, go to the coldest city in the world. So a lot of people do like homemade goods that they sell, like the beadwork is the biggest thing, fur work the biggest thing, right? But beyond that, we do have sort of like a trained classical painters and stuff like that that's happening, which I'm not particularly amped on, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that it exists, but it's not my scene, so to say. But in sense of contemporary artists, I'm not really sure what's going on in there because I lost touch in a way. It's been 7 years so far, but I know that the form of art that exists would be sort of like a music video making or like really weird movies.
Yeah, you made me think. Well, going back to the punk thing and the alternative, independent artists that this may be, you know, a place where there's room and.
There could be a room, but the thing is, it's like it's not marketable, you know, which is a good thing because it does not kill off the idea of DIY, you know, do it yourself kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like in America right here, currently, let's say, DIY is not like do it yourself or independent anymore. It's very much so profited and marketed thing now, you know.
Mm-hmm. But at least offer things that would draw people in.
Yeah.
And so then maybe the Russian government would have to recognize that this is a hot spot.
They
I mean,
would, yeah.
X Games, Siberia.
It might happen.
I mean, yeah, frozen basketball.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. It just seems here that it's funny, you know, that it's not funny because I know this art is very powerful, but in this independent thing that gives it more leeway because it's not held to tradition that you would make your own tradition.
Yes.
So you may be the next art goddess.
The representative of contemporary Siberian art.
Have you met any other artists that?
From Siberia, you mean?
Well, yeah, that has attained. And I'll say this: your stature. I mean, you're the first Siberian contemporary artist I've ever met. And
I met a guy while I was in Fort Ross, actually, by San Francisco. He came to attend the conference. They had this event where they were like, you know, Siberian people were here, let's make a cultural Siberian day. You know, but it wasn't like sort of like a nice way of presenting one culture. It was very much so sort of capitalizing on it and sucking the life out of it and turning it into a product. So the artist that they chose to show was a painter who paints in like this like a realistic, but then again like a little bit of fantasy spun on it kind of paintings. And I think he's my father's friend, and I met him, and it was very interesting to actually encounter another artist, you know. But we definitely have very sort of different trajectories in our views about art and what art should be or what it should look like, I guess.
you know, you're a very brave person. So, I mean, what did it take to get here? I mean,
To America?
I mean, you're following obviously a dream.
I was following a dream. Well,
Talk about your dream and then talk about the path to get here.
Okay, so when I was a kid, I was very interested in sort of like a Native American culture.
Okay.
For some reason, I used to have this history book, and it would have all these like different tribes from all over the world.
Yeah.
And I was really into it. And then when I was a kid, I was like dreaming of becoming like this cool anthropologist who could go there and study all these cultures. Right? Time had passed, my interests changed. I got really into photography, and I applied for the school in London, even almost as a joke. You know.
So you went to art school in London?
I did my first year in London. Yeah.
Okay.
And I applied there. They got really excited. So they invited me, and then after my first year, I decided to transfer to America. And I got an offer from Otis, and I got an offer from Miami, and I went to Otis. I went to Los Angeles because I thought, you know, California is big, I could drive around and see the world and meet everyone I need to meet, so that's how it started. I literally jumped on it. I like any opportunity I had, I just went for it.
Braver than brave. So I've always been captivated that your English is so great. So was it taught in Siberian schools like a lot of
We had
European countries do?
right. We had a choice in between French, German, and English in high school. I chose English, but it was very sort of like elementary kind of English, where it's like they taught you how to order coffee, for example. It was more about like one day you might go to America as a tourist. This is the things that you could say, but my mom was really keen on me actually learning English for some reason, so she took me to a couple classes once a week, and it was going okay, but it wasn't great. And then I decided to take charge, and I bought Lord of the Rings book in English, and I sat with it and my translator, translating and underlining each and every word, trying to learn. But it's an interesting thing because, like, in that book, half of the words are made up words. You know what I'm saying? They're like different languages that are like made up languages, and it was just like I think it was like an interesting way of sort of interacting with English. Yeah.
Well, as you know, American English is sort of make-believe too. There you have words that are the proper English thing. Wow. So I feel almost like touristy over here asking this kind of thing. I get that all the time. People that want to know about Indians, and you finally corner one, So let's just go to something totally irrelevant, like foods.
Foods.
I mean, big difference. What are typical?
Okay, so typical foods, right? Frozen fish is big, so you just slice it up nicely and you just dip it in the sauce and you eat it, and it melts in your mouth.
What's the sauce?
The sauce, it's just a mixture of ketchup and mayonnaise and some
no,
garlic
I don't
in
know,
it.
but no, there's something there. I mean, that ketchup is universal. And
same
the
as
fat.
The fats, it's a fat-based diet, and we eat horse meat.
Mm-hmm.
It's really tasty, and you can
I've
eat
had
it.
Yeah,
you can eat it raw. You can eat it cooked, beef, deer meat. It's mostly like meat-based diets. So you can cure the meat. Sometimes my mom does this like a meat cure where she like puts some garlic and salt cooks it. She like rubs it with salt and keeps it for I don't know however long, and then it's like kind of almost homemade salami kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We have a soup similar to menudo.
It's
exactly menudo but no hominy.
Okay.
So the first time I actually tried menudo, I was like, I feel like I'm home. So that was a big deal. We have blood sausages are a big thing. So you take the intestinal tract, you fill it back with the blood and add some milk and you boil it down and you cut it up. Very good. Lots of sort of like pastries, and they're like smaller round ones, and they're the ones that look like exactly like fry bread. So that was another similarity, I guess. But I think that similarity, like a fry bread similarity, comes from like sort of like not having enough resources and being exposed to a certain poverty, I guess.
Yeah. Leftover. Rations. You have a short growing season, so what grows there?
Potatoes grow really well. Potatoes and cucumbers and stuff like that, I guess. Sort of like
then you pickle them?
You pickle them. My mom pickles, and we also we gather wild berries. That's what we do. Our female seasonal job would be carrying as much berries as you can and preserving them for the winter. And it's sort of like, it's your source of sugar in a way.
Yeah.
Butter making, milks. I mean, my dad's side family, they have horses, they have, cows. So we've been exposed to sort of like a farm self-sustained life.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents grow all of their vegetables and then store them for the winter.
Wow. Well, I mean, there's certainly something said about not government welfare system, because you still have to fare on your own, so you haven't been completely ruined.
In a way, yeah. Well, the hunting's also helping, right? The males hunt. My dad, for example, he hunts 6 months out of the year. He's in the wild, doing his thing. So, but the thing is, I think that is dying out too. Now you have to get a permit to hunt.
You have to get a permit.
You gotta get you have to get a permit to hunt, and to fish now you have to belong to my mom's tribe to be able to fish. So fishing is becoming kind of limited too. And now also like sort of like the hunting is becoming this like a game thing. It's not a real hunting anymore. It's not done because of the need, but it's done because of the excessiveness now. So that might ruin the last cultural standing within the hunting for us. So.
There'll be a few diehards.
Probably.
But it's you know, I would have thought that I think the word's no, I know the word is I'm thinking it. Systematic.
Systematic. Yeah.
There's a systematic plan there
Mm-hmm.
to deprive us, and
Exactly.
that has a domino.
Yeah. But it's interesting because they're targeting all these things that are in relation, in particular in relation where, let's say, like our cultural thing finds a resistance in like this one form, and they just like go for it, you know.
Language.
Language, I don't know, hunting, food in a way of life.
Ceremonial.
And now also, like, interesting thing, a lot of people are forced to urbanize now because of the lack of resources, and schools are closing down, you know, like elementary school, middle school, high school, you know.
Closing down.
They're closing down because people are moving into the city.
Oh.
Because, you know, city has resources, city has, like, you know, schools, city has universities and more jobs. Because on the countryside, we literally have no jobs. But it's like the urbanization, it's in a way, it's like almost like an invisible silent relocation, you know, the way I see it.
Yeah. It's wow. I'm astounded. Is there anything you wanna expound on?
We could talk about sort of like tools and baskets if you want.
Yeah.
Basketry, I've never seen sort of like it's not similar basket making as in here. Materials are maybe a little bit different. They're mostly made out of like birch bark, and horsehair is used to weave it through. So you like weave it with the horsehair is also used to make hats that are supposed to, you know, like regulate your blood pressure and stuff like that if you have it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they're really warm, right?
They're really warm, yeah. And well, I've never actually seen like a pattern in baskets. I'm pretty sure they do exist. I've just never encountered one. But I remember growing up, and my mom we always had this like, you know, homemade birch baskets that we'd go gather berries with.
Oh, birch basket.
Birch baskets,
Okay.
yeah, they're really cool. But I don't know, ever since I remember I had the instinct to always weave things, you know, so whenever I sit down in a field, I'll weave something, so I guess there's some sort of like a reminiscent, sort of like traditional, I guess, things that are inherent within you, in a way. I believe in that.
I do too. Tool making?
Tool making, knives, silversmithing is pretty big, very big. Jewelry making is pretty big. Beadwork is huge.
Well, it's some form of commercial.
Right. It has not been as much commercialized. Now I think they even have like specific stores where you can come in and buy like traditional clothes. But before that, I remember being back at home and my mom would make me clothes. So we would stay up all night, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She's really good at like making traditional dresses, and like she has been like enrolling in competitions for like a traditional costume for like summer powwows.
Indian market comes to Siberia.
Yeah. Well, we have our New Year's in the summer solstice, and it's a huge powwow, the same dancing, round dancing, singing, and it goes all night long, and you stay up all night and you breathe the first song with your hands up and gather up the energy, you know.
Say that again? No, it's beautiful.
You stay up all night, pretty much. You hang out, you meet the people, you mingle, you eat traditional foods, and then you greet the sun and you put up your hands up, so you collect the first energy of the first summer day.
Sweet.
And you charge for the whole year. But it's a huge sort of like a powwow scene where, you know, people come with like baskets and like, you know, saddles and all this homemade stuff where you can like buy stuff or display stuff, and people enter like costume competitions, singing competitions, a lot of like athletic traditional sports competitions.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, horse racings and stuff like that. Yeah.
Have you heard of the Indian word snag?
Snag?
Well, I'll tell you later.
Okay.
It's like keepy creepy. Get my drift?
Yeah, totally.
Well, but I mean, those social functions did form as that, is to keep the clans alive, so you'd be women's and guys from other bands. And, yeah. And unfortunately, that is another thing that was banned here.
Mm-hmm.
They just thought we were having fun. Well, we were, but there was a purpose to the fun.
Right.
Renewal and things.
Renewal and things, and I think it became tragic in the 70s, obviously, right, with the Sundance and stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, Denise is gonna love this weaving part. So we're doing this project I mentioned to you about the basis of the theme for this performance work I'm doing with Okinawan Japanese American Denise Yurihara is DNA and the scientific theories behind that and how that fit into the migration, so-called migration pattern of our existence here as Native people. But I think it goes beyond that, and I was quite enlightened to work with Denise and find out that Okinawa and Ainu people are the first people to Japan, and that they came by boat. So my thinking of them as indigenous was a little different, and that the Okinawans came as well, and they were actually Ainu, and they separated.
Oh, okay.
So I love this kind of connecting the dots. But the whole thing about DNA goes against, at least here in my tribe, creation stories were, it started here. We weren't brought from someplace else. And I think a lot of, I can't think you can get a consensus for creation stories across the Americas. Everybody has, theirs a little different, but most of them don't point to coming from someplace else. Do you have a creation story?
Well, the thing is, creation stories, I have not been familiar with them up until later, but the ones that I've heard were sort of like a scientific ones, the ones that are told you at school, were like, you came from Lake Baikal or Mongolia, and I was like, wait a minute, that does not sound right. Because the way we sort of think about it, and the way that tribes actually exist, it's like so centrally located to where we are, in particular to the place. And it talks about the particular landscape that cannot just move to there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the creation story, I guess I don't necessarily have a exact one, but there's an ideology that there's a tree of life, and there are different worlds around it evolving, right? So the middle world is the world that we occupy right now, and it's not like heaven and hell kind of thing. No, it's just where we live, and then there are forces, sort of like energies. So there's like a very strong earth currents and energies, which would be the lower world, and there are sort of like sky currents and energies, which is the higher world. And all the beings that live there are the spirits. Like, let's say they're spirits who rule that particular how do you call that, like air, fire, and stuff, water and stuff like that. So it's a very different one.
Well, yes and no. I mean, this is really profound because since the theory is that we all came from you, well, you had to come from someplace, and your theory isn't coming from some other place; it's coming from the earth.
Yeah.
That's great. That sort of enhances all that in a way. In our performance. I think the crescendo, the end of it's going to be, interjecting our creation stories, so that it's contradictory to these maps we showed and the connections which are there, but they could have been done through trade,
right?
Not migration, and I think the DNA and the migration thing kind of feeds into. The whole scientific thing is everything can be proven scientifically, which is Western.
Which is very Western, yeah. And it's, knowing that it's Western, we also know that it's probably biased in some way, right?
Probably, yeah. Well, that's what we want. Why we felt it so important to talk to you. I mean, you just validated a whole other thing that we hadn't thought about, and or at least through light on it, about as coming from the source. I mean, you're as closest to the source as we've met, the so-called source. So, well, this is a good homework for you when you return for a visit back there.
I know, gather up some good information.
Yeah. I just recently found out that from a native traditionalists, as far as herbs and foods and things, and language speaking, that actually in up there where you're teaching in Idlewild, where the Kuya acorn grounds are, that they're in competition with the Koreans.
For what?
Acorns.
Acorns, really?
That it's part of the Korean diet. Not everybody. That it was a food that was used in times of famine. Particularly when there was a certain period where people ran to the hills. And I found ground, bleached acorn meal in a Korean supermarket in Mira Mesa.
Whoa, that's so intense. Yeah.
It's very intense. Well, one, because of the competition,
Uh-huh.
but that, again, it kind of validates again about cross culturalization, and not at this direct, because there's other people that eat acorns in the world, but that I had never thought about it.
Uh-huh.
And of course it, I don't of course, but the Asians took it to another level, and learned how to, I mean, it's very time consuming process to get to the meal,
Right.
but somehow
learn
they
how-
found the process and were able to do that and bag it, and you could buy the flour and make your drink or make your pancakes, or they make it sounds like, from my reading, a similar kind of pudding gel like
Right, yeah.
concoction.
I
So
wonder if they taste kind of similar.
I don't know. You know what? I gave it to a couple local native people who are, and we call it wiwish,
Uh-huh.
or shawi, our bread out of acorn, to see what it was like, and they haven't done it because they're afraid. It boils down to there was a fear there.
Okay.
Not that it would poison them or kill them, but it just felt so funny,
Uh-huh.
it coming from someplace else.
Right.
But certainly, because it is time consuming and not a lot of people make it anymore, that there are people around here that sell it to other native people. And those people know the value of it, so they'll pay a price because it's a gourmet item now.
Yeah.
And other people can't do that because it is a traditional food, and so they give it away.
Okay, got
They
it.
give it
Yeah.
away. And so, I think that's part of it, about it becoming commercialized, where you could go down to 7-Eleven and
Bye.
buy a wee wee sandwich or something with,
I wonder, this is a very interesting topic for me, because I wonder, how we think about art world being colonized, right, by Western
Yeah.
thought or stuff like that, and occupied by it in a way, and let's say some forms of art making are languages, obviously, and it would be interesting to start thinking about food in that way too, because that would straight link us to the food industry and the way that animals are treated, right, or the way a specific plants are treated, or the way they're manufactured, and then this idea of this food being particular to your culture, but then encountering it in a bigger, a commercialized idea. It's probably really bizarre. No, I can totally relate to that.
Well, it could be two things. It could be the fear of it being commercialized, because
Mhm.
it is a gourmet item and it's
Mhm.
something that does take work. There's no hurrying it up in our way.
Yeah.
It only comes at a certain time of year, and the whole process of getting to the meal is a process: drying, grinding, bleaching it. So to have it just come in a bag, it's just scary.
It's scary, yeah.
But on the other hand, you could take that, and if it didn't quite taste right, you could mix it and cut it
Mm-hmm.
with what you do have as tradition, and all of a sudden you got twice as much we wish to consume
Yeah.
or sell. Or in your area where something became popular, I mean, it could be commercialized, and all of a sudden it kind of diminishes something about that pickled or
Right.
that natural salami you were talking about, because where it becomes known, and all of a sudden people are making it for money as opposed to subsistence.
Right, and then, the way they accessing the product, the process of it, if it's it has a meaning to us to make it, it emphasizes the season. Let's say if it's particular to a season, like acorns, right? So there's a time frame there. There's also gathering it and making it. It's a whole process that you do with people. Maybe you share it, and there's ideas that are in relation to your culture. And then when it's cut off completely, that's how I felt going to Fort Ross to film that movie.
Yeah.
The way the culture was filmed, that's how I felt. I was like, oh my god, we're a product now, officially in America.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing, and then coming back to it now that you mentioned it, berry season.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's very similar to our acorn.
Yeah.
Piota,
Mm-hmm.
that's another word for the seeds. Gathering it, because there's no hurrying. And today it's a little different because it's individual, or someone will take their kids so they learn.
Mm-hmm.
But in the day, the whole village went, and it was a communal.
Communal thing, yeah.
People had their roles, and there were songs. There were songs for plenty. There were songs for thanks.
Uh-huh.
When it came to the time where they would be dried and still be in nut form, and there's a little skin, there's a way to toss them in a basket
Mm-hmm.
so that that skin would be blown off, and so were songs for wind.
Oh wow. That's
And we don't have that anymore.
See, yeah.
See, so I mean, it's diminished, but what we have is precious.
Precious.
So I mean, if they had a berry machine tomorrow, and your jam became gourmet, I mean, it just wouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
It's getting out there. I mean, as much as it is. I mean, I have a Hopi friend that laments, going home, and they put her on the rock to grind cornmeal.
Yeah.
But it's a workout. But nothing tastes better than that.
Yeah. Well, there's a touch to it. Yeah. I remember, well, the way I grew up, I guess I was in that way a little bit privileged because my parents were a little bit more traditionalist than the
Yeah.
other parents, let's say in the city, right? And we never had to buy meat. We never had to buy butter. Like buying those things were like out of the movies for me, or like
Yeah.
buying a jam or like berries. That was like very unusual to me. And then I think the older I got, like at age like 14, 15, when I was a little bit older, I actually encountered people, selling their meat products or selling the berries on the side of the road, and that just like kind of like created this understanding that some people are not as privileged as me in the sense of being in touch with their culture or like being able to like sustain themselves, right? And then I came to America, and like buying produce is just like the supermarkets were like a big thing for me. I was just like, where am I? This is so excessive, and it was kind of shocking.
Here's another Americanism. Right now, I'm going to throw you a knuckleball.
Okay.
It's a ball you throw, and you clench it, and you throw it, and it goes like this. It's a knuckleball.
Knuckleball.
But what we're talking about, and I'm thinking, well, isn't that contemporary native art? The commodification, that's such a word, of native art, because native art, quote quote,
Right.
is controlled by the market,
Right.
and people make art to sell, and it may not be their thing.
Mhm.
I mean, it may be, because it may be part of their tradition, or they just kind of carry on this look,
Right.
for it. And I think that's one thing we can say. No, I shouldn't say that entirely. That contemporary art, native contemporary art isn't, because there's technique, but there is also an avenue for voice that you couldn't do as well in those other art forms.
Right. But that's how I also like it. It's a strength and a sort of like a spot where I guess they could hit us with,
Yeah.
I think that's the ways that they find the way how to commodify us, So let's say they would, it's like, and then the way the commodification works, right, nowadays, or like this new day tribalism, like I call it, people like in tribes, I call them,
Mhm.
they relate to each other with the very surfacey things. So let's say something on the surface that is not deeper in relation to you, but to your appearance or to your preferences, sort of like dictates what tribe you're going to be or who you're going to be affiliated or associated with. And that's what's creating the bigger problems, I think, for the contemporary artist nowadays.
One last knuckleball. This is a double knuckleball.
Okay.
Here it comes. Okay, as a media artist,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to share with you this story and respond, as a media artist.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, I remember, in part of the language revitalization that was going on in the tribes and things like that, and it was in California, that there was a debate about whether elders should be recorded
Oh,
for
no.
posterity.
Okay.
And the debate was obvious that these are oral traditions.
Mm-hmm.
These were to be handed down.
Mm-hmm.
Memory, regardless, though they were passed down as intact as they could be, but of course, being human, that nothing's intact. But maybe that's the beauty of it. So there's a couple things here.
Uh-huh.
One is, my take on it. I didn't quite make up my mind,
Mm-hmm.
because I am a man of contemporary society and grew up with that,
Mm-hmm.
and cherished the idea of having it, but understood on the other end as a native person about it being lost, but also that it does change gradually.
Gotcha.
It's somewhere in there, and so I guess so. My question to you is, or just to let you go with this, is give me some of your reactions to what I just shared with you.
Well, as sort of like I guess, like you said, like a contemporary person, right? Or a person who's been exposed to these contemporary things and decided that he or she is going to utilize this tool, which is media or like any image producing, as his sort of like a form of like expression and form of talk, right? It's like we got to start thinking about it in a different way. But then when you come with that compromise where you like, there's also like a tradition within this, right? Like outside of like what I want to film is a tradition, and the tradition says don't film this or don't record this, right? So there's like some sort of a cherish, there's like a factor where you want to cherish it, but you can't anymore because you already know how to use these tools, and you've been so used to everything being immediate. But I think there's a way where you could maybe talk about the problems the particular, let's say, oral story brings about, and find a way how to represent it in your own way. Right? I don't know. It's for me it's very difficult because like I've been struggling with this problem where I feel like the media and video and like filmmaking they're like insanely like it seems like it could be a free and open world you could go into and do all this cool stuff, but it's really not. It's very much so controlled, and there's a demand for particular things, and things have to look particular way, or there are like different other politics playing a role, right? So it would be a good way to find it to sort of like bring in like the idea of indigeneity to the practice, which I think it's a pretty hard point to reach nowadays, but I think it's kind of doable by being persistent and rigorous. Yeah, I think those are two things that are good, but things are changing.
And you're just that proud and brave woman to do it. Look at the camera. Smile.
Great. Let's check this.
I hope it was recording. Oh yeah, it was.